Let's kick off. And so, just a big welcome to this panel. This is an exciting panel where we will introduce Dora's new guide, a practical guide for implementing responsible research assessment at research funding organizations. And we're pleased to share that this guide was developed in collaboration with two partners, namely the Global Research Council's Responsible Research Assessment Working Group, as well as Science Europe. So for those of you who have not met before, my name is Kelly Kobe. I am the co-chair of DORA alongside Ginny Barber. And my day job, my day hat, so to speak, I work as a scientist at the University of Ottawa Heart Institute, where I direct a program on meta research and open science implementation. So today, we're actually the first of three launch events happening in different time zones today and tomorrow. And we're really excited to hear, particularly our focus today is on the Americas regions, about the status of implementing responsible research assessment at funders and in other environments. And today our goal is really to better understand issues around responsible research assessment in these different contexts, and to understand how our new guide might be helpful for people to take concrete actions. So in terms of the housekeeping flow of the day, the work plan for us is that I'm going to start off by talking very briefly about DORA and then introduce you to the guide that we're releasing. And then you're actually going to hear from my colleague Sean McGurk, who is from the GRC's Responsible Research Assessment Working Group, but also works at NSERC here in Canada. And he's going to be talking about that group's new self-assessment tool for responsible research assessment. And then we're going to have our speakers on the panel today reflect about responsible research assessment in their environments and a little bit about their initial perceptions of reading the guide. So they got sort of early access to it and have had a chance to peruse it. And at the end of the panel and those discussions, there's going to be time to open up and have a broader Q&A with all folks joining. In terms of some other housekeeping, keep your comments to the chat while the discussion's going on. At the end, you can feel free to ask questions by raising your hand. Responsible research assessment obviously varies from different environments, so we are really interested in hearing folks on the call and their perceptions. And as we move through the day, it'll be myself and Sean sort of moderating and introducing the panel. But we also have with us two of Dora's staff, actually, Haley Hazlett and Giovanna Lima. And so if you have questions of a technical nature or any issues, you can use the chat to address those, in particular to Giovanna. Okay, so I'm going to pop up some slides in a moment and introduce Dora briefly in the guide. But before I do that, I'm going to briefly introduce you to our panelists. So we're really lucky to have three esteemed panelists with us here today. So we have Olivel Freire, who is the president of CNPq, which is Brazil's National Council for Scientific and Technological Development, and it's linked to their Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation. It funds research projects across all scientific fields, also awards research fellowships and scholarships. Olival is a full professor at the Federal University of Bahia and a senior researcher specializing in the history of science. Thank you so much for joining us and for your time. We additionally have Emily Ford, who is the director of the Open Research Funders Group, a community of private philanthropic funders invested in open scholarship, open research, and open outputs and solutions. In this role, she works to connect people, ideas, practices, and strategies to improve the open innovation ecosystem. And she shared that in a past life, she was an academic librarian and a full professor researching open peer review. So she brings those perspectives to the table today as well. So welcome, Emily. And then last but certainly not least, Annie De Nicola. Anna is a full professor and head of the Physical Biochemistry Lab at the School of Science at Universidad de la República in Uruguay, where she currently stands at the council as delegate of the teaching body and interim dean. Since 2019, she is part of the Commission Honoraria of the National System of Researchers, who are in charge periodically of evaluating and categorizing all researchers who carry out scientific activities in Uruguay, as well as Uruguayan scientists abroad. So a very fascinating role. So welcome to you as well, Anna. Okay, so as I said before, launching into the panel and getting to hear from our panelists, I'm going to quickly take you through a bit of background information on Dora and the guide that we're so excited to release today. So I suspect many of you are very familiar with Dora, but just to create a common understanding, you can think of Dora, the Declaration on Research Assessment, as both a statement of principles as well as an organizational initiative that campaigns for and supports research assessment reform. So the declaration itself has been really, I think, successful in drawing attention to the potential problems of existing forms of assessment, such as overemphasis on quantitative metrics like journal-based metrics when hiring, promoting, and making funding decisions. A lot of people, I think DORA is just like one thing about not using journal impact factors, but if you actually read the declaration, it's a nuanced set of 18 recommendations for different actors in the research ecosystem, including funders, institutions, publishers, and even metric suppliers and researchers. So there's been more than 27,000 signatures to DORA. And signing the declaration is an important way, often for individuals, but I think also for organizations to publicly declare their commitment to recognizing, firstly, there's a problem with how research is being assessed in many of our environments, and that they want to make change. So responsible research assessment is what they're committing to, and it's the idea that they're going to evolve towards research approaches which incentivize, reflect, and reward a broader plurality of characteristics of high-quality research. So not just how much research we're doing, but the actual quality of that work. And I think together it will help support a diverse and inclusive research culture. In terms of our mission at DORA, it's pretty broad. We are global in nature and we span all scholarly disciplines. And we also work with all actors in the system. So scholars and funders and academic institutions are some that may be most intuitive, but we also worked with learned societies, publishers, and metrics providers. So we're working across the system to advance this agenda. And so building on our momentum for change in the past years, some of you will have heard that we had an Arcadia Foundation grant, and in it we created a practical guide for reforming research assessment at research performing organizations. So we released this in May of last year. And so today, what we're doing is we're releasing the sister volume. So based on our success with this implementation guide for research organizations, we've co-developed a guide for funding organizations. So you can see that on the slide. I know Giovanna will pop it into the chat as well. And so very briefly, the aim of this guide is to answer the common question when we, in DORA leadership, we get often is, how do we actually get going with this? So people are recognizing they need to reform, but what are the concrete steps to move from that recognition to actually doing something that changes the system? So we're hoping it starts as a bit of a one-stop shop for research funding organizations that takes them from that recognition towards developing a strategy and then implementing and monitoring that strategy. So this is going to be an evolution, not a revolution. It's going to take time, and we need that monitoring throughout. The guide offers practical tips, resources, and examples of implementing responsible research assessment. So it's meant to be, as we've called it, a very practical guide. And one of the things that was really challenging for writing this guide is that funders exist in such different landscapes and ecosystems. We also have different types of funders, public, private, sectoral. And so this guide is a bit of a choose your own adventure. And we have drawn from those different communities, but different realities will probably resonate with different funding organizations. And so we think there's a bit of something for everyone, but the guide is by no means meant to be prescriptive. In order to make the guide sort of fit for purpose, we developed it in a sort of co-creation model. So the folks you see on the screen there, we met in Copenhagen in December of last year as a satellite event to the SARA conference, and really helped to sort of nuance the guide and make it accessible to these different contexts. And right now, I think, it's at a point where there's a bit of repetition across the chapters, but our vision was that would occur so that people could dive in to the book or guide at different sections. So you don't need to read it from top to bottom for it to make sense and to be relevant. You can go to the chapters that make sense for you. So the four main chapters of the guide are I'll go through them very briefly now. So chapter 1 is really just the context for what responsible research assessment is, the principles of responsible research assessment, and the benefits of the coordination of this on a global scale. Chapter 2 dives in a bit deeper, so less introductory, and it lists 7 potential activities that a funding organization might want to engage in if they're walking down this path of responsible research assessment. And the activities are numbered and kind of ordered, because we had to put them in the book in some way, But we want to make it clear that we don't want to be prescriptive. So not everything necessarily needs to be done, not all seven actions, nor do they have to be done in the order that they're listed. But they're a broad range of characteristics we thought folks could consider. Chapter 3 then delves into 5 key moments in research assessment in the funding cycle. And so it talks about what types of interventions you could think about as a funder in each of these contexts. And we have lots of tables and sort of like a menu or recipe of different options that you can see what other funders across the world are doing and see, can we rinse and repeat that, or rinse and modify and repeat that in our context, so that funders aren't starting from scratch and can learn from others. And then finally, the last chapter, which is maybe my favorite, is highlighting how responsible research assessment connects with other components of the research system. So as you know, there's a lot of parallel change movements in this space. I, for one, got into the responsible research assessment space trying to implement open science. Others do so through trying to implement research integrity or societal impact. And so these different sort of parallel change movements all intersect with responsible research assessment. And what this chapter is trying to do is sort of talk about the relationships between these different movements. And I think it's especially true and relevant for organizations that are facing like a bit of fatigue, where they have a range of different things that they're trying to do and perhaps fraction budgets. I think responsible research assessment is a lens through which you can connect some of these movements and work towards more harmonized implementation. So obviously we're very excited about our guide. That's a quick run through of the different chapters. There's also a range of different spotlights. There's one on AI, for example, which is very topical right now. We have had some additional case studies added. So some of these are adapted from the GRC's library, but we've also developed one sort of bespoke. The Canadian federal agencies developed one on Indigenous perspectives in the research funding cycle. And so these live in our guide as well as in our repository for folks to peruse. So I think those will be popped in the chat as well. But for the sake of time, I'm going to stop there. I think that gives you a very, very rapid overview, if you will, of the guide and the different components of it. Certainly looking for feedback on it as you have a chance to peruse it. Before we go to the panel, I'm going to hand it over to Sean, who's going to take you through the new GRC self-assessment tool for funders. So Sean, I'll invite you to share your slides and then go on to moderate the panel afterwards.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Kelly. And I think Giovanna was going to reshare the slides here as well. But while that's happening, I did want to particularly wish Dora a very happy birthday today, having been part of the team at NSERC and across the granting agencies in Canada that helped to have us co-sign Dora all the way back in 2019. Seeing how far all this has come in the 13 years since Dora was set up has really been a true pleasure. And it's been phenomenal to take part in all the Dora funders groups, a lot of the discussions that Dora has really set up over the years. And in fact, the very existence of our working group was very much supported by a lot of early engagements with Dora. So it's been a real pleasure working with the whole team on the practical guide and also on this new tool. And so if we move to the next slide, for those who don't know the Global Research Council, it's an organization that was set up back in I believe 2011. NSERC is one of the founding members of this, and it's effectively a group of funding organizations from all around the world representing approximately 100 funding organizations, which really work together to try to address the science policy issues of the day. Our working group on responsible research assessment was set up in 2021 to help position the GRC as a convening space for discussions in this area, to strengthen the GRC and its members as a leading voice in the implementation of RRA within research funders, and to really support integrating this as part of how we look at research culture more broadly. And so our working group currently comprises 25 members from 24 countries. The GRC itself is effectively split up into regions across the globe, 5 different regions. And we have great membership from across all 5 of these. My co-chair for this is Nasisa Dube from the National Research Foundation in South Africa. And so really breezing through this, there is a lot of work that has gone through the working group over the years. I'm putting something in the chat currently, which is a link to the most recent resource. And so, to go very quickly, we really started a lot of this work to build a shared understanding of RRA across the Global Research Council and all of our funding organizations that are represented. This was set up as a foundation we called the Dimensions of RRA, which was published in 2024. And we continued building surveys, engaging our members, building in case studies to try to share information and share best practices in the space. And over the last year, I've been working very closely with Dora and with Science Europe, who is also a member of our working group, to develop this practical guide, as well as a self-assessment tool that funders can use as a companion, which is described on the next slide here, which effectively, this is also a very long document to itself, it provides a set of key implementation stages for each of the dimensions of responsible research assessment that we've outlined, very well aligned with all the different elements from chapter 4 of the practical guide that Kelly had mentioned, which is also my favorite chapter, I'll say, and describing how funders can approach implementation of these different dimensions across increasing stages of maturity over time. Recognizing that funders are coming from different contexts, understanding that they can implement this in the way that best fits with their local infrastructure. And it provides a set of questions and answers that can be used to help to guide that self-assessment and help funders guide their next steps. I believe I have one final slide, which is we have 1 year left of our current mandate of this working group. We'll see if how this discussion will continue across the GRC, but this has become a very central focus point for the Global Research Council as a whole. There will be a major announcement of these products at the annual meeting next week in Bangkok, Thailand. So I will just invite everybody to keep track of this and to look at our website that I put in the chat for more information. With that, to maximize our time, I think we'll move right into the panel. And so just waiting for our 3 panelists to appear on the screen. Hello, Olival, Emily, and Anna. Welcome to all 3 of you. I'm going to start off immediately with a question for Emily. And so in your work, you engage with private funders on a very regular basis. Could you share more on what you feel are the main benefits of implementing RRA from their perspectives?
Yeah, as I've been thinking about this, I've been in this seat with the Open Research Funders Group, and what I see is that open practices and RRA are inextricably linked. Open science, in my view, could not exist without RRA, and RRA could not exist without open science or open output practices and these open behaviors. There's several parts of the guide that mention this linking. For example, whether it's using appropriate metadata schemes to make work findable, data materials reusable, or to taxonomies for authorship and study contributions. I think that private funders are committed to open science and open scholarship, partially because they're committed to the responsibility of their dollars having the most impact on knowledge and research. And it's really hard to have the most impact behind a veil of opacity. Funders want researchers also to be successful, and they're doing everything they can to support the success. I don't think funders are here to be punitive. When it comes to RRA, I think implementing some of the suggested best practices like support and training, having policies and reporting guidelines that are very clear and easy to follow. They help researchers be successful and make it possible for funders to track their real world impacts. Just a few more things I'd like to highlight. There's a point that was made clear in this guide, and it's articulated in the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft from 2022, the German Research Council. I forget how that translates. Sorry. That RRA and open science are cultural. They're not just check marks. So I'd really love to see this guide move some of this culture forward, seeing RRA and open science practices not as separate, but as part of a culture of exemplary research ecosystem practices.
Thanks, Emily. And I think that's really well reflected in chapter 4 of the guide as well around not just responsible research assessment, but how this contributes to broader responsible research culture as a whole. And I think that's something that's in common for funders across all the sectors. Which brings me to my next question for Olival. So you're the president of a large national public funder in Brazil. What do you think are the resources that are needed for RA reform in a funder such as yours?
From my own experience at the CNPq, let me first say that Dora's declaration has been a source of inspiration for some changes that we are trying to introduce here at the CNPq. The main introduction we have already done, it's the introduction of what we call in Portuguese súmula curricular, which is a kind of a narrative curriculum as part of the evaluation. Now, part of the evaluation in a huge contest of fellowships we have in Brazil. It's CNPq fellowship, productivity fellowships. We have about 18,000 of these fellowships on average for 3 years, which means that each year we have a new call, open call, and each year we need to select around 6,000 fellowships in different areas or fields of research. We have indeed 50 scientific committees. So our status now is that we are in a kind of a balance, a trade-off between a very qualitative evaluation with this narrative curriculum, where we ask that any researcher should say what are his or her best achievements in the last 5 years. So not exactly the best, the most important paper. Achievements. This may be, for instance, policies, this may be patents, this may be anything. So it's a declarative proposal. And this is a trade-off with the regular quantitative criteria based on factor impact. So in this balance, we think that we are giving modest steps in the direction of a more responsible assessment. Now, our main difficulty, first, as you said, we are a huge federal board, which means that it's easier to just make the computation of number of citation, number of factor impact, it's easier. So this is a big problem. But the second is the kind of culture that is shared by our researchers. It's a kind of, I would say, resistance among our researchers to move for a more responsible assessment. Then we needed to make cultural changes in order to introduce these new criteria of assessments. Then this is more difficult to change because this kind of culture, the researchers they acquired this kind of cultural pattern through a very successful career. Then it's not easy to change, but it is our battle. In this battle, in this fight, I think that Doris has been a strong source of inspiration and support for our work.
Yeah, definitely agreed with you on that, and I'd say very similar for us as well. Anna, moving to you. So you currently sit in committees responsible for implementing these new RRA approaches. What do you think are of practical guidance that you could share on advocating for them in Uruguay and beyond?
Yes, as you said, as you mentioned, I'm part of the committee that is responsible for evaluating all the research scientific community in Uruguay. It's called the National System of Researchers, SNI. And this evaluation uses three committees. The first one is specific on a discipline, the CTA. Then all the areas got together in an integrating committee that is called the selection committee. And finally, the honorary committee, REMAT, it makes the final decision, and it studies the differences and promotion and rejections. There is also an instance to appeal the decision of the CH, the Honorary Commission, Appeal Court. But the whole evaluation process is based on the CV of the researcher, the CVUY. And in that CV, it's really clear the numbers, the bibliometric indicators. I mean, the number of publications, the patents, the thesis defended. But it's hard to evaluate the quality of the impact of the work. As Dr. Oliver Freire just mentioned, it's how can we measure or demonstrate the contributions made to the society with knowledge advancements. So we know that we need to improve and go beyond the quantitative range of metrics, but I think without discarding them totally. We have to use them as a complementary in search of a more broad, holistic view of the research, and take into account also considerations like teaching, mentoring, public communications, of course. So now we are facing now is changing the CV with a partial narrative CV, where the applicant has room to explain his or her main accomplishments as well as difficulties faced in the period of evaluation. So the institutions doing research are committed to do so. So they are engaged. And for sure, the use of the practical guide will improve the implementation of the RRA in Uruguay. I also would like to mention that one of the critical points that we face is to have training of reviewers, because the scientific community in Uruguay is small, and we have a hard time trying to integrate the committees, and then renew them every 4 or 6 years is difficult. So we would like to train the reviewers. We say that the system now is overloaded, overheated. And the big question we have is, can we use AI to alleviate the work of the reviewers? And that the practical guide with the special case studies will hope it can help us. Another critical point that we have is how to be fair in the evaluation of women, especially mothers doing research in Uruguay. There's the scissors effect is here. We have more women at the initial steps of the career, and they are less and less as long as they advance in the career. So the familial obligations, the responsibilities of caregiving mainly fall on the women of the family here. So there's a clear gap in the female research career after they have children. We know that, but how do we bypass this in the evaluation? Career breaks. We have already implemented the extension of the evaluation period, but that for sure doesn't help to solve the problem. I mean, the delay in the women's scientific career is there. So we say the diagnosis is made, and we have to find new suitable therapies. I mean, how to do that. And again, for sure, the use of this practical guide, especially in the case study, because the situation in each country is different. In Uruguay, the community is really small. We have to face that. So I think practical guide will help us.
Thanks, Hannah. That was exceptionally well put. And I think a lot of these same challenges are shared all over the world. One of our other primary working groups across the Global Research Council is on EDI, and started out as a gender working group to really address this
Yeah.
topic very centrally, and is one that really intersects with RA quite closely.
Okay.
I'd like to pass it back to Emily. So this guide talks about different assessment moments where RRA can be implemented. Would you be able to share with us some initiatives that you've seen benefiting funders in your network in these different moments?
Yeah, I am fortunate to see a lot of movement. Private funders are able to innovate quite rapidly. There's a few things that really relate back to the guide, and I'm sorry I didn't do a great job of saying like which chapter you should look at for examples. So if anyone wants to put that in the chat while I'm talking, please do. So first, I'll start at the output level. There was a preprint that was released last month by Bodo Stern and Aaron O'Shea at Howard Hughes Medical Institute, entitled Realigning Incentives in Biomedical Research. There is a Zenodo link that I think will show up in chat, but it proposes along these lines that, and I'm going to quote, researchers should be recognized and evaluated based on the outputs they have shared directly, as in independently of journals, while journals should be compensated for the value they add, not for the privilege of exclusive publication. So de-emphasizing the title of a journal, so taking journal titles out of an evaluation process. Rather, is it shared? Is it out there? They also push in this preprint for open peer review, and saying that decoupling journal citation from journal names. So like, can you take that citation metric out? So I would encourage everyone to have a look at that preprint. There's also on the output level, the Aligning Science Across Parkinson's Open Science Handbook was just updated at the end of December. In my seat, it's the most comprehensive handbook that I've seen to date. So I think that's an excellent example. The guide talks about how we need our policies and procedures and reporting guidelines to be clear. This is one that really outlines it very clearly. The guide also talks about supporting training for researchers. The American Heart Association has done an excellent job of doing data deposit training for their researchers and offers sample data plans for researchers to use. So really trying to create the resources that will help researchers be successful. I have many more examples. There's a new open science policy from the Michael J. Fox Foundation that was just released in April, also on Zenodo. And then the guide also talks about some experiments with peer review. So the VW Foundation has done this experiment with distributed peer review. HHMI is currently doing work to understand and do training with early career researchers on open peer review in collaboration with pre-review. And then there is also, I think that in my work, I work deeply with folks in private philanthropy and their access to research policies. And there's going to be more information about those coming out later this month from the Open Research Funders Group. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Thanks, Emily. I do think that we could go on forever with examples, and I think that's one of the benefits of this guide is it actually brings quite a lot of it together, but there's still a lot more beyond this. It's a very dense topic. I'm going to go back to both Anna and Olival for this, and maybe starting briefly with Anna. So now that we have this guide, and I know you haven't had likely a chance to look at the self-assessment tool at this stage, but now that we have these resources, how can these help to move RA forward in Uruguay and Brazil and South America more broadly? You're still on mute.
Okay.
There you
go. Well, we are having discussions all together with the different institutions that are doing research and have to evaluate that scientific work. So we've already get together from last year, and we end up with 15 points of agreement that we have to share and try to impact. And I mentioned some of them that we have to keep on working on. And I think, as I said, the institutions are engaged, so it's not going to be difficult. But all the bureaucracy is heavy, so it's not going to change like that. And also there are some, like the problem of gender. There are some cultural problems. I mean, when I say that the caregiving responsibility fall into women, especially, that has to do with the cultural thing, and that needs maybe years of changing a generation to change that. But we are in the process, and the main thing is that the institutions are engaged. So I think we can implement this. And as I said, the practical guide and specific, all the examples or the cases study will help us to do it.
Excellent. Oliver, would you like to speak to this as well?
Anna's earlier comments provoked me to make additional comments about the situation, the experience in Brazil related to the use of AI, the gender problems, and in general integrity issues. About AI, we moved recently at the CNPq to have an internal norm where we said that you can use AI in the elaboration of the project, but you need to declare where did you use the AI, and you are fully responsible for the project. So no fault, no problem may be considered a kind of individual exception, because so you are responsible for the final product. But on the other side, we have so far prohibited the use of AI in the evaluation, because you have a delicate problem that we need to discuss, because some of the projects, they have new ideas, new proposals, and they are submitted to the federal agency based on trust. There is a problem of confidentiality. If you use this project in any AI app, you are sharing with these broader data centers in the world these ideas. So far we have prohibited this. This is not an easy situation. We are reflecting about it, but it's our current situation. About mothers and adoption, we also we took the decision that any episode of a new baby, either by adoption or by birth, any episode means 2 additional years in the period of evaluation. So the standard period is 5 years. This may be extended to 7 or 9. But I must say that this was included very recently, in the early 2024. Before this, we did not have these strict rules at the CNPq. It's a small step. It's a small, I'm sure, but it's an important step. I think so. In addition, we have some initiatives that we call affirmative actions, mainly for women, Black women, indigenous women, that we are offering fellowships to spend some time abroad during the doctoral studies or after the doctoral degree. But it's not an open section. It's just the eligibility is for women, Black, indigenous, in this case. We have the name of the call is Beatriz Nascimento, who was a Black historian, very important in Brazil. We have the first issue of this open call, and this year we will have the second issue. In the first issue, we were not able to grant 86 fellowships of this kind. And finally, we have now a strong integrity code at the CNPq. This integrity is some of the targets are not new, for instance, plagiar and things like that. But one important thing is that any report about project, if this project incide in some prejudice, in some bias, gender bias, ethnic bias, regional bias, this may have some punishment to the evaluator. So our current rules is that the evaluation is still blind. Nobody knows who gave the report, but if the report is considered biased, if it's considered that there is some prejudice, the person who emitted the report may suffer some punishment in the future open calls at CNPq. So it's our impression that integrity is part of the game that we are discussing as responsible research. Finally, I think that this new guide, will be very helpful for us in Brazil, because we are thinking to move for a formal signature of DORA. And the guide may our team here be more confident that we should give this step. I know that it's only a formal step, but as we are a federal agency, a step like this needs reflection. And at the same time, when we sign this declaration, this would be more effective in our own evaluations. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this. Our time together is already running quite short. We're going to be moving to a Q&A in just a minute, but I did want to ask a final question from each of our panelists here, and I'll start off with Emily. And so RRA is truly, as we've seen here, takes a village. It's a collective effort that requires change from different actors in the national and the international space. If you could, in very few lines, your insights on how we can learn from each other when we're in such different environments, and how do we take this forward collectively?
Well, you may not know this, but you're talking to a past unionist and union organizer, so I have a lot of thoughts about how to move change forward. I would just say, no action is too small. Mention something about RRA while you're at the water cooler, or if you have coffee with a colleague. And I think small societal change, cultural change, it starts with these individual face-to-face relationship building. And I think that's probably especially, and it scales, obviously. But I think that is the crux, and we have to keep doing that, because this work can be tiring and exhausting and demoralizing. But making that one-on-one connection, a human connection around these issues, I think is going to keep us energized to continue the good work to move this forward.
Phenomenal point. Anna, would you like to add to this?
Excuse me, what was the question?
What are some best practices that we can follow to learn from each other from all these different environments? How can we take RA forward as a collective?
Well, as I mentioned, we are getting together, all the institutions getting together and trying to move forward in the same way. So I think that's very important that we achieve already that. Listen to the experience in Brazil right now. It's helpful because we are a little bit behind maybe. So we need to learn from other experiences, other cases, successful, like the ones that are presented in the practical guide right now, and the ones in our neighboring countries. the problem that we have in Uruguay, we are a small community, as I said, and compared to Argentina and Brazil that have different numbers.
Agreed. And I think we might be just losing Anna. So Olival, I'll turn to you for a few
Yeah,
final.
just a short answer. I would say that I began to interact with people from DORA after I am at the board of CNPq, and I think that it has been very important. First, because we can feel that we are not alone in this very difficult to change, very difficult task to change the culture of science. Science has been a very successful enterprise in the humankind. So to change a so successful culture like science, it's not an easy task. And when you feel that you are not alone, this makes things easier.
Thanks so much. I think those are fantastic words to end the panel on, and I will pass it right on to Kelly to tackle the, I'm sure, excellent questions we've been receiving in the chat.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sean, and thank you to all the panelists for that discussion. So please, folks, feel free to enter your questions in the chat. We've received a few already. One that I think is a little a common question that we have, so I thought we'd put it right to the panel right away. So the question is, how can assessors, so grant peer review panelists in this case, validate that the achievements and contributions described in narrative CVs are not misrepresented or maybe exaggerated? So, how do we actually know that what they say they did is actually true? So, open it up for comments and thoughts on that.
Maybe I can give an answer if Anna and Emily allows. I think that it's a wonderful question because this is the main challenge. Selection committee have the responsibility to judge, to evaluate the narrative curriculum. The narrative curriculum is something self-declarated, but it's up to this committee to see if there is or not a misrepresentation or an exaggeration. Then I think that this is the main focus, the main challenge, because it's easier not to judge, just to get the number from the quantitative criteria. So it's not an easy task. Some committees do not like to do this, but this is our main challenge.
Absolutely. Anna or Emily, any other thoughts to add? Hope we don't hear you, Anna.
Can you hear me now?
There you go. Yeah.
Okay. So far, we don't have in our CV any narrative CV. So it's all numbers, number of publications. And you know that in the committee, you don't always have the person specialized in the area of each researcher. It's impossible. So to measure the impact or the quality of that work, of that, for example, publication is not as easy. You have to face on the journal, the number of citations, etc. So implementing a narrative CV that we're trying to do now that is going to be ready for next call is a way of, as I said, giving the opportunity of the researcher to focus, to make the judge, the reviewer, to focus on some points on the CV that are already in the CV, of course, but to focus on those that actually took a lot of effort or faces a lot of difficulties to implementing or represents a really big accomplishment by the researcher. So, as Oliver said, it's the responsibility of the reviewer to actually judge if that was exaggerated or really is adequate. But I think it's important to guide the reviewer to those points that represented in that period are really big step in the career or not, or where are the problems that the researcher face, and that's why the publications were not as good as expected, etc. So of course, it's the narrative is just subject, is not objective, but the reviewer has to deal with that. And that brings to the other point that is important. We need to train the reviewers to do so. So that's another point.
Yeah, these are really great points from both of you, and it really resonates with me. Like I actually did a scoping review of funders who implemented narrative CVs to kind of map who's doing it and how they're doing it, and whether or not they've trained their sort of research community around actually how to go about using this new narrative CV. So it's great to see narrative CVs, but I think what both of you are pointing to is like narrative CVs in the absence of training researchers in how to write them, and then training grant reviewers on how to appraise them. It's not going to be effective in implementation. And I know I've seen, for instance, my own grants that I'm writing, when my colleagues send their narrative CV for me to attach, they've effectively, in some cases, just squashed their traditional CV into a narrative format. So the view for broader impact or assessment of like a broader range of activities beyond number of publications and journal impact factor, it hasn't really been taken up. They've simply just transformed from lists to paragraphs the same information. So I really think the need for training to write and then to adjudicate is absolutely so critical.
Yeah.
There's
I had one more thought. Sorry. I just wanted to add, so I think there's one thing here, and I don't have experience as a funder evaluating with a narrative CV. So let me just say that. But I can see where there are other RRA practices that can complement it. So the guide does talk about the credit taxonomy. So there's other metadata standards that can be a complement to it, but with a warning that if we rely too much on these on just those metrics, that's problematic. So there needs to be complementary action there. If publishers are using credit taxonomy, et cetera, that would be something. Or if folks are using their ORCID IDs, things like that can point back. Sorry, Kelly, to interrupt.
No, that's great, and I appreciate those additional points.
I totally agree with Emily. Because as I said, we don't have to switch from a quantitative CV to a totally narrative CV. I mean, we have to complement the information on both sides.
And that's when surveys of researchers have occurred, that's what they say they want. They want a mixture of quantitative and qualitative evaluation. So that's what the community is expressly saying.
I totally agree with what you said, that the narrative CV are super complementary to other means of evaluation. And it's important to train not only the reviews, but the proponents. From our experience, we have now the second round using narrative CV. Many of our proponents, applicants, they just reproducing the summa curricula data that we can get from the databases through the world. So it's a kind of a learning curve in our community. That's why it's a cultural change.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, maybe for 2 minutes, 3 minutes left, I'm going to throw a big one into the panel. And so the question came in, and it was around comments made about the use of AI. So we know and expect our researchers are using AI to generate their applications. And actually, we have no really good way of telling whether they do or not. So it's hard to mitigate. And then the question was around how do you make sure the evaluators aren't using it? And so there's some good discussion in the chat about how this is really just done on trust and sort of a commitment. I wondered, Emily, if you wanted to comment on your piece around training in that context as well.
Yeah. I mean, I just really think that once reviewers are empowered with the tools to be providing robust reviews that don't rely on AI, they're going to feel like they don't need to use it. And I think in my past life as a researcher with open peer review and looking at how review training happens, in my experience, people are trained to review by being thrown into a situation where they have to review and there aren't good reviewing guidelines, there's not good support, there's no transparency around the process, and you're an early career researcher or you're a graduate student and you have a good mentor or you don't. So that's where the robust training for the reviewers, and also in my view, where open peer review can be part of that. So it enables a robust dialogue in the review process. So you look at the distributed peer review experiment that is discussed by Volkswagen that we mentioned earlier. Training, 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 training.
Yeah, it's I always make the joke with respect to peer review of publications, but it holds true for peer review of grants as well. So, when it comes to peer review, there's no training. So there's no core competencies. We tend to learn these skills very informally on the job. And, when you're early in your career, you might join the panel, or you might do your first peer review. Later in your career, without any additional training, suddenly you get to become the editor at the journal, or the chair of the grant panel that everyone sits on, right? And so people do this based literally on seniority. It's not based on skills or expertise or core competencies, which is, for when I think to the public often sees sort of peer review as like the cornerstone of selecting quality science and making sure that, robust decisions and systems where we're handing out federal funding are made. And we place such little emphasis on sort of the scientific hygiene of the peer review system and our evaluation. So yeah, it's pretty shocking to me. I think we're at a point where we're coming up to the top of the hour, so we will have to stop there. A huge thank you to everyone who attended today, especially to our panelists and for Sean for co-chairing alongside with me today. I think we're obviously very excited about the guide. If you're interested in having some of the DORA team or some of the GRC or Science Europe colleagues who co-produced the guide disseminate it locally in your context, maybe a webinar or at a conference, please reach out. We're really excited to sort of have boots on the ground, so to speak, and to connect with the community and to share feedback. So Giovanna's popped in our email. So, if you'd like a presentation or you have feedback, the idea is that this will be a living guide. So this takes people from thinking about responsible research assessment, whether in the first guide or in a research institution or in the second guide in a funding organization, acknowledging it to having a strategy, starting to implement and monitor that strategy. So over time, we'll need more guidance and there'll be more exemplars from the community. So we'll hope to add to that. So we're looking forward to keeping the conversation going. Following today, Giovanna is going to send an email with some of the details we talked about, certainly a link to the guide itself. I will share as well that we do plan to make a third guide, so stay tuned in terms of that guide and the community it'll be addressing the needs for. But yeah, just a big thank you all for your time today, for coming. Huge thanks again to the panelists and to Sean, and don't hesitate to reach out if you want to connect with DORA explicitly regarding the guide or other topics. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.